The dirt felt different today, softer. It wasn't the hard, frozen ground of a Chicago winter, but the loose, dark earth of a new beginning, or an ending. Elizabeth stood, a lone black coat in a sea of them, and felt nothing. The minister's words about Robert, her husband of 50 years, were a drone, like a fly buzzing against a window pane. He spoke of a pillar of the community, a devoted husband, a loving father. Elizabeth heard a different list: a tyrant, a warden, a master of the silent, suffocating command. For 5 decades, she had moved to the rhythm of his moods, a dancer on a floor of eggshells. Now, the music had stopped, and in the silence, she felt not grief, but the strange, hollow echo of a cage door swinging open. Her son, David, stood beside her, a hand on her elbow. It was a gesture that was supposed to look supportive, but it felt like a brand. His grip was firm, possessive. He was the CEO now, of everything. His wife, Amelia, stood on his other side, a portrait of manufactured sorrow. Her black dress was a designer cut. Her sunglasses hid eyes that Elizabeth knew were already calculating. The condolences from the small crowd of business associates and distant family felt like transactions. Handshakes were firm. "So sorry for your loss," they said, but their eyes were on David, the new patriarch, the keeper of the keys. As the last handful of dirt was tossed, Amelia's perfectly manicured hand found Elizabeth's other arm. Her voice was a soft, syrupy whisper, laced with poison. "Elizabeth, darling, once things have settled, we need to talk about the practicalities." David nodded, his expression a mask of solemn concern. "Mom, we're just worried about you. That house, it's too much." The house, of course, the grand old Lincoln Park brownstone. It wasn't just brick and mortar, it was her last fortress, the only thing Robert hadn't been able to put entirely in his own name. Her inheritance. "It's a 4-story beast, Elizabeth," Amelia continued, her voice sliding smoothly into the role of the sensible one. "The upkeep alone, the stairs. We've been looking into this wonderful place. Evergreen Meadows. It's more like a resort, really. 5-star dining, activities, on-site medical care. You'd be so safe there." Safe. The word hung in the cold air. They didn't mean safe. They meant contained, warehoused. Elizabeth looked from her son's handsome, earnest face to her daughter-in-law's sharp, predatory one. She saw the same gleam in their eyes. Not concern, not love. It was the hungry glint of prospectors who had just struck gold. They weren't mourning a father. They were closing a deal. The funeral was just the preliminary paperwork. The chill that ran down her spine had nothing to do with the wind. The warden was dead, but his heirs were here to lock the final gate. The silence in the house was a physical presence. It was heavier than the scent of wilting funeral lilies, deeper than the shadows that stretched across the polished hardwood floors. For 50 years, this house had been filled with the sound of Robert's presence, the heavy tread of his shoes on the stairs, the authoritative clearing of his throat, the rustle of his newspaper. Now, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of Elizabeth's own heart. David and Amelia had left hours ago, after a short, stilted cup of tea, where they'd circled the topic of the house like vultures. They left behind a glossy brochure for Evergreen Meadows on the marble countertop. The cover showed a smiling, silver-haired couple playing shuffleboard. It looked like a luxury prison. Elizabeth picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated, and dropped it into the trash. She was alone, utterly. Her friends were Robert's friends' wives, women who knew the same dance of quiet obedience she did. They would offer sympathy and casseroles, but not understanding, not solutions. The feeling of being cornered, a familiar sensation from her marriage, returned with a suffocating intensity. Robert had done it with glares and calculated silences. David did it with a charismatic smile and the language of concern. The method was different, but the goal was the same: control. She retreated to Robert's study, a room she had rarely entered without being summoned. It still smelled of him, old paper, leather, and something bitter, like disappointment. His laptop sat closed on the mahogany desk. An impulse, born of a desperation she hadn't felt in years, made her sit in his high-backed leather chair. She opened the machine. It booted up, asking for a password she didn't have. Of course, Robert's life was a fortress of secrets. But David was a different generation. His fortress wasn't built of mahogany and leather. It was built of light and code. Using her own tablet, a simple device she used for recipes and emails, she typed his name into the search bar. The internet bloomed with his success. Forbes, David Clark, the visionary CEO of Viridian Dynamics, on disrupting the future. A photo of him on a stage, looking confident, powerful. His smile was dazzling. Twitter was a cascade of praise from industry analysts. Viridian's Q3 earnings defy expectations. Clark is a master strategist. He was a titan, a genius, a self-made man who had built his tech empire, Viridian Dynamics, from the ground up. The company specialized in data security and logistics software, impenetrable and efficient, just like its founder. It was all so polished, so perfect, a little too perfect. A flicker of her old, buried stubbornness sparked to life. The woman who had survived Robert hadn't entirely vanished. She had just been dormant. She dug deeper, past the sponsored articles and press releases. She searched for Viridian Dynamics employee reviews. And there it was. A side door into the fortress. An anonymous forum, Glassdoor, something called Fishbowl. The first few reviews were glowing, sanitized, likely written by the HR department. But she kept scrolling, going back months, years. And then the whispers started. A thread titled, "Is anyone else burned out?" "Culture is cutthroat," one anonymous user wrote. "They call it a meritocracy, but it's a shark tank. David Clark preaches innovation but rules by fear. You miss a target, you're out. No discussion." Another replied, "Heard about what happened to the CFO, Markham. Resigned for personal reasons, my ass. He was escorted out by security on a Friday afternoon. He was asking questions about the Phoenix Fund." The Phoenix Fund. The name sent another jolt through her. What was that? Someone else chimed in. "Don't talk about that here. Walls have ears, even digital ones." The thread was a year old, buried deep, but it was there. A crack in the perfect facade. She felt a tremor of validation, a sick, cold feeling that was part fear, part vindication. She wasn't just a paranoid old woman. Something was wrong. Her investigation took a new turn. If David was the polished exterior, Amelia was the billboard for the profits. Elizabeth typed her daughter-in-law's name into Instagram. Her profile was public. Of course it was. It was a curated gallery of breathtaking extravagance. Amelia in a white bikini on a yacht in Santorini, the water a shade of blue that didn't seem real. Amelia raising a champagne flute in a Dubai skyscraper, the city lights a galaxy at her feet. Amelia modeling a new Hermes handbag, the price of which could have paid Elizabeth's property taxes for a year. The captions were a mix of inspirational quotes and hashtags. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag living my best life. Had hard work pays off. Hard work. Elizabeth did the math. David's CEO salary was public record, listed in the company's annual report. It was enormous. Yes, an obscene amount of money. But was it this much money? The private jets, the couture gowns for charity galas, the constant, relentless display of seven-figure leisure. It felt excessive. It felt desperate. She scrolled back, her thumb moving mechanically. A photo from 6 weeks ago. Amelia and David at a black tie event. He was smiling his brilliant CEO smile. Amelia was beaming, her hand on his chest. On her wrist was a diamond bracelet, a river of light. Elizabeth stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. She zoomed in. She knew that bracelet. It had been hers, a gift from her own father on her wedding day. It was supposed to have been passed down to her own daughter, if she'd had one. A week after Robert's diagnosis, Amelia had come over, full of sympathy and concern. "Elizabeth, you have so much to deal with. Let me help you organize some of your old jewelry. We can get it appraised for insurance." Elizabeth, distracted and numb, had agreed. She hadn't seen the bracelet since. She had assumed it was in a safety deposit box. But there it was, on Amelia's wrist, flashed for the world to see, hashtagged #date night. It wasn't a gift. It was loot. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of terrifying clarity. The whispers on the web, the sudden departure of the CFO, the questions about a Phoenix Fund. Amelia's impossible lifestyle, her stolen bracelet. It wasn't just about the house. The house was just the final piece of a much larger, much darker puzzle. Her son was not the man he appeared to be. He was a liar and a thief. The seed of dread that had been planted at the graveside began to sprout, its roots wrapping cold and tight around her heart. A week later, the doorbell rang. It was evening. The sun had set, and the house was dark, save for a single lamp in the living room. Elizabeth knew who it was before she looked through the peephole. David and Amelia stood on her porch, but they weren't carrying a casserole or a bottle of wine. David held a sleek leather portfolio. She opened the door. "Mom," David said, his voice smooth as silk. He stepped inside, kissing her on the cheek. It felt like a snake's kiss. "We were in the neighborhood. Thought we'd see how you were." Amelia followed, her smile bright and brittle. "You haven't been answering your phone, Elizabeth. We were worried sick." A lie. She had been letting her calls go to voicemail, listening as their messages shifted from cloying concern to clipped impatience. She led them into the living room, the one with the fireplace and the suffocating portraits of Robert's ancestors. She did not offer them a drink. She sat in her armchair, the one with the worn fabric, and waited. David didn't waste time with pleasantries. He placed the portfolio on the coffee table between them. The sound of the leather on the wood was like a gavel. "Mom, we need to be realistic," he began, his tone shifting from concerned son to CEO in a board meeting. "We love you, and because we love you, we can't stand by and watch you struggle." He opened the portfolio. Inside were not family photos, but stacks of pristine, official-looking documents. The letterhead of a high-powered real estate firm was on top. "This is a cash offer for the house," David said, his voice flat. "It's well above market value. No inspections, no contingencies. They can close in 2 weeks. It's an incredible deal." He slid another set of papers across the table. The Evergreen Meadows logo was at the top. "And these are the pre-admission forms. Amelia and I have already paid the deposit to hold your suite, the one with the garden view." Elizabeth stared at the papers. The ink was black and final. Her life, neatly packaged for liquidation. She looked up from the documents and met her son's eyes. For the first time, she didn't try to hide her thoughts. She let him see the cold fury that was solidifying inside her. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it filled the room. Amelia sighed dramatically. "Elizabeth, please, don't be difficult. We are trying to help you." "No," Elizabeth repeated, her voice stronger this time. "This is my house. I am not selling it, and I am not going to your resort." David's smile vanished. It didn't fade. It was wiped away, revealing something hard and ugly underneath. The charming facade dropped like a mask, and for a bone-chilling moment, she saw his father. It was in the cold set of his jaw, the utter lack of warmth in his eyes. It was the look Robert used to give her just before he delivered a crushing verdict. "Mom," David said, and his voice was a shard of ice. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're not thinking clearly. You're emotional. You just lost your husband." "I am thinking more clearly than I have in 50 years, she said, her voice shaking slightly, but not with fear. With rage. The answer is no." He leaned forward, the charismatic CEO gone, replaced by a predator. "Then you leave me no choice. My lawyer," he tapped the portfolio, "has also prepared a different set of documents. A petition for legal guardianship." The words hit her like a physical blow. Guardianship. "We will argue," he continued, his voice low and menacing, "that you are suffering from cognitive decline, that you are a danger to yourself, that you're incapable of managing your own affairs. We'll have doctors testify. Your recent reclusiveness," he gestured around the quiet house, "will support our case. The judge will see a grieving, confused widow and a concerned son who only wants what's best for her. Who do you think they will believe?" He sat back, the threat delivered. It was the same tactic Robert had used, refined for a new generation. Where Robert used emotional blackmail, David used legal terror. Surrender your autonomy, or I will have it stripped from you by force. The ultimatum was absolute. Elizabeth looked at the man her body had created, the boy she had raised, and she saw a stranger, an enemy. The last vestige of maternal love withered and died in that moment, replaced by something cold, hard, and sharp as a diamond. She was no longer fighting for a house. She was fighting for her mind, for herself, for the right to exist as more than a line item on her son's balance sheet. The war had been declared. For 2 days, a suffocating despair pressed down on her. The threat of guardianship was a phantom that lurked in every darkened corner of the house. David had the money, the power, the lawyers. He could paint any picture of her he wanted. A confused old woman, lost in her grief. It was a plausible story. It was a lie, but it was a plausible one. She was trapped, cornered. The feeling was sickeningly familiar. It was the same helplessness she'd felt when Robert would lock her out of their finances, giving her a small allowance, as if she were a child. She paced the floors of her gilded cage, the silence of the house mocking her. What could she do? Call the police? On what grounds? My successful son wants to sell my house. They would laugh her out of the station. She needed proof. She needed leverage. She needed to get inside his world, inside his fortress, Viridian Dynamics. On the third night, unable to sleep, she was scrolling mindlessly on her tablet. Job sites. She didn't know why. Maybe some part of her was fantasizing about a different life, a simpler one. And then she saw it. A small, unassuming ad at the bottom of the page. Night cleaning crew needed. O'Hare Plaza Tower. Competitive pay? Flexible hours. O'Hare Plaza Tower. Her heart stopped. That was it. The gleaming 60-story skyscraper downtown. The headquarters of Viridian Dynamics. An idea, insane and audacious, began to form in the deepest recesses of her mind. It was a flicker at first, a mad spark in the darkness. What if? No, it was impossible. A 72-year-old woman. A janitor. They would never hire her. It was a fool's errand. But the spark didn't die. It grew. Fueled by a lifetime of suppressed defiance, it ignited into a raging fire of a plan. What did she have to lose? Her dignity. David was already trying to strip her of that. Her autonomy? That was what she was fighting for. Using the same tablet she'd used to uncover his lies, she began to build a new identity. She opened a new email account. She started a new resume. She didn't type Elizabeth Clark, widow of Robert, mother of a tech CEO. She typed a name she hadn't used in 50 years. A name that felt like a ghost on her tongue. Betty Novak, her maiden name. Betty. The girl she was before Robert, before the long obedience. A girl who had been spirited and hopeful. The resume was sparse, but believable. She listed housekeeping for a small hotel that had closed 20 years ago. She mentioned private residential cleaning. She kept it simple, plausible. She clicked apply, her hand trembling. It was a shot in the dark, a desperate prayer sent into the digital void. She expected nothing. 2 days later, her burner phone, a cheap prepaid device she'd bought for cash at a 7-Eleven, rang with an unknown number. "Hello? I'm looking for a Betty Novak?" a harried, tired voice asked. "This is she," Elizabeth said, her voice miraculously steady. "Hi, this is Mike from Corporate Cleaning Solutions. We got your application for the night crew at O'Hare Plaza. We're desperate for people. The shift is 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., Monday to Friday. Can you start next week?" The world tilted on its axis. It was that easy. A labor shortage for an undesirable shift. They didn't care that she was 72. They just needed a warm body with a clean background check, which she had. She was hired. The plan, once a mad fantasy, was now terrifyingly real. She moved with a speed and clarity she hadn't felt in decades. She went to the bank and withdrew a substantial amount of cash from her personal savings account, one Robert had never known about. Online, she found a small, nondescript furnished studio apartment for rent in a neighborhood a few miles from the downtown tower. She paid 3 months' rent in advance, in cash. No paper trail. She packed a single suitcase, not with the clothes of Elizabeth Clark, but with the practical, simple things Betty Novak would own. A few changes of clothes, comfortable shoes, toiletries. The last step was the most difficult. She had to lie to David. She had to placate the enemy. She called him. "David, darling," she said, her voice pitched to sound tired, resigned. "Mom, I was about to call you. Have you had a chance to look over the offer?" His voice was smooth, confident. He thought he had won. "I have," she said, taking a deep breath. "You were right, David. It's all too much for me. The house, everything. I need some time to think." A pause. "What do you mean?" he asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "An old friend of mine from college, Martha. She lives out in Oregon now. She invited me to come stay with her for a while, to get away from all of this. I think I'm going to go indefinitely." Relief flooded his voice. He was buying it. An old woman running away to a friend's house made sense. It was weak. It was predictable. It meant the prize, the house, was now unguarded. "Mom, that's a wonderful idea," he said, the fake warmth returning. "You do that. You take all the time you need. We'll handle everything here." "I know you will, dear," she said, and hung up before he could hear the ice in her own voice. That night, she left the Lincoln Park house for the last time. She didn't look back. She took a taxi to the small, anonymous apartment. It was bare, impersonal, with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. It was perfect. On the neatly made bed lay the uniform the cleaning company had couriered over. A simple dark blue polo shirt and matching work pants. Elizabeth picked up the shirt. It was made of cheap, coarse polyester. It smelled of a factory. She held it up, and in the dim light of the single lamp, she looked at her reflection in the dark window. She didn't see a grieving widow. She didn't see a helpless old woman. She saw Betty Novak, and Betty Novak had a job to do. Her secret war had begun. The sharp, sterile scent of industrial cleaner was the first thing that hit her. It was the smell of erasure. A smell designed to wipe away every trace of the day, of the people, of the life that pulsed through these halls from 9 to 5. At 2 in the morning, the Viridian Dynamics headquarters wasn't a building. It was a tomb, a monument of glass and steel, silent and cold. Elizabeth, now Betty Novak, pushed a wide, heavy-duty mop across the polished marble floor of the lobby. The rhythmic slosh and squeak of the mop head was the only sound in the cavernous space, a lonely echo that bounced off the 40-foot ceilings. Her uniform was a drab gray, a color meant to make her invisible. And it worked. The 2 security guards, a young man named Marcus who was always scrolling on his phone, and an older, heavier man named Al, who dizzy in his chair, had barely glanced at her when she'd clocked in. She was just part of the furniture, part of the night. Her age, her stooped posture, a slight exaggeration of the ache in her back, it was all perfect camouflage. No one looks at the cleaning lady. No one ever had. For the first week, she did her job, meticulously. She cleaned toilets with a vengeance, scrubbing away grime as if it were a moral stain. She emptied trash cans, her gloved hands sorting through the day's refuse, crumpled reports, styrofoam coffee cups stained with lipstick, discarded lunch containers from expensive downtown delis. But all the while, she was learning. Her eyes, sharp and clear behind her plain, non-prescription glasses, missed nothing. The building was a grid. She mentally mapped it, floor by floor. The executive wing was on the 25th floor. David's office was the corner suite, a glass box. She could see it from the main corridor, a shrine to himself. Minimalist black furniture, a single dramatic orchid on a low table, and an entire wall lined with framed magazine covers and awards. Visionary leader, innovator of the year, the man who reinvented synergy. The words were hollow, meaningless. Like the eulogies at Robert's funeral, she learned the security camera placements. There was a blind spot just past the emergency exit on the 25th floor, near the service elevator, a small alcove where they stored extra cleaning supplies. A perfect place to pause, to listen. She learned the patrol schedule. Al did his rounds at the top of every hour, his footsteps heavy and predictable. Marcus stayed at the main desk, his world contained within the glowing screen of his phone. At 3:15 a.m., he'd go to the break room on the 10th floor to use the fancy coffee machine. It was a precise 5-minute window. The silence of the office at night was different from the silence of her Lincoln Park home after Robert died. That house was filled with the ghosts of unspoken words, of 50 years of quiet submission. This silence was different. It was the silence of power, of secrets kept behind locked doors and encrypted servers. It reminded her of Robert, not in its sound, but in its feel, the oppressive weight of it, the way it demanded you shrink, become smaller, stay in your place. When Robert was alive, her place was the home. Here, in this building, her place was on her knees, scrubbing floors. The irony was not lost on her, but every time she felt a surge of fear, a voice whispering that she was a foolish old woman playing a dangerous game, she would look towards the 25th floor. She would picture David in his glass box, so much like his father in his leather armchair, and the fear would harden into something else, something cold and sharp. Resolve. She rented a small Spartan apartment 3 blocks away, a single room with a kitchenette and a mattress on the floor. It was all she needed. She'd told David and Amelia she was staying with an old friend from college, someone they'd never met, in another state. Just for a while, she'd said on the phone, her voice deliberately frail. I need to get away, clear my head. Amelia's response had been sickly sweet, dripping with false concern. Of course, Elizabeth, you take all the time you need. We'll handle everything here. She knew what everything meant. The house, the sale, their inheritance. They thought she had run away, a sad old woman retreating from the world. They had no idea she was running toward the fight of her life. Her evenings were for research, her days were for sleep, and her nights belonged to Viridian Dynamics. She knew she couldn't crack a server or bypass a firewall. That was a world of magic she didn't understand. Her battleground had to be the physical world, the world of human error and carelessness, the low-tech world. She found her opening on the 15th floor, in a communal break room for the marketing department. It was just after 3 a.m. Al had just finished his lumbering patrol. Marcus, she knew, would be getting his coffee in about 10 minutes. The room was empty, lit only by the humming glow of the vending machines. And there it was, a shared desktop computer, its screen still on. Someone, probably a junior analyst working late to impress a boss who wasn't there, had forgotten to log out of the company's internal social network, a cheap knockoff of Facebook called Viridian Connect. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was a mistake she could exploit. Her hands, still damp from a cleaning rag, trembled as she moved the mouse. The screen flickered to life. A page of corporate announcements, photos from the company picnic, a reminder about quarterly performance reviews. Useless. She felt a pang of disappointment. Then she saw the sidebar. Groups. She clicked it. A list appeared. Viridian Runners Club, Marketing Brainstorm Hub. Viridian Parents. And then, near the bottom, a group with a strange name. The Alumni Association. It was archived, meaning no new posts could be made, but the old ones were still there. Her breath caught in her throat. Alumni, a polite word for former employee. She clicked. The page was a ghost town, the last post over a year old. But as she scrolled down, the tone shifted. The early posts were bland, people sharing their new jobs. But the older the posts, the angrier they became. It was a digital graveyard of grievances, a place where people had come to vent, to scream into the void after being chewed up and spit out by her son's company. They act like they're Google, but they treat people like garbage. I worked 80-hour weeks for 2 years. My bonus was a $100 gift card. The culture of transparency is the biggest joke I've ever heard. Her fingers flew across the mouse, scrolling faster. And then she found it. A thread started by a woman named Sarah Jenkins. The first post was from 3 years ago. Sarah Jenkins. Is there anyone else here from the finance department? Specifically, anyone who worked on the Q4 2021 projections? I have questions. Serious ones. A few people replied, most with vague encouragement. But Sarah's posts became more frequent, more frantic. Sarah Jenkins. They fired me. I was walked out by security this morning. My boss said my performance wasn't a good cultural fit. I was the top-rated analyst in my division for 6 straight quarters. This isn't about performance. Sarah Jenkins. It was the Executive Incentive Fund. That's what they called it. It was a slush fund. Millions of dollars being funneled into an off-book account. I asked David about it directly. I showed him the numbers. He looked me right in the eye, smiled, and told me I was a very bright young woman with a great future ahead of me. The next day I was locked out of the system. Elizabeth felt a cold dread creep up her spine. This was more than just a toxic workplace. This was criminal. She kept scrolling, her eyes scanning the desperate words. Sarah Jenkins. He ruined me. They didn't just fire me. They blacklisted me. Every interview I get, it's going great. And then they make the call to Viridian for a reference. The offer disappears. I can't get a job anywhere. He's draining my savings. I'm going to lose my apartment. He didn't just take my job. He's trying to erase me. The last post was the most chilling. Sarah Jenkins. Someone has to have records. Someone else has to know. Please, I have nothing left to lose. He can't get away with this. The post was 2 years old. There were no replies. Elizabeth's hands were steady now. The trembling was gone, replaced by an icy calm. She pulled the burner phone from her pocket. It was a cheap, prepaid model she'd bought for cash at a 7-Eleven. She began to take pictures, clear, focused photographs of every single post from Sarah Jenkins. The words glowed on the small screen, a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading right to David's door. She heard the distant ding of the elevator. Marcus. Her time was up. She quickly logged out of the account, wiping the browser history with 3 practiced clicks. She grabbed her mop and bucket and was halfway down the hall, swabbing the floor with methodical strokes, when Marcus walked out of the elevator, a steaming cup in his hand. He didn't even look at her. She was invisible, and in her pocket, she held the first piece of her son's ruin. Getting into David's office was the next step, the final step in this phase of her plan. She couldn't just pick the lock. She needed a way in that wouldn't raise suspicion, a way that seemed like an accident. She spent 2 nights observing the maintenance staff. There was only one man on the night shift, a weary-looking guy named Hector, who mostly sat in his workshop in the basement reading car magazines. He only came up to the floors if a service call was logged. She had to create a service call. Her target was an electrical outlet on the wall just outside David's office door. It was part of a small, decorative alcove that held a ridiculously expensive-looking modern sculpture. On her 3rd night of planning, she brought an extra component in her cleaning cart, a full 1-liter bottle of water. At 3:30 a.m., with Al on his rounds on the lower floors and Marcus glued to his phone at the front desk, she made her move. She walked calmly to the alcove, her bucket in hand. She looked both ways down the long, empty corridor. Silence. With a swift, deliberate motion, she tripped, sending the bucket flying. Water sloshed across the marble floor, splashing up the wall and directly into the electrical outlet. There was a sharp crack, followed by a fizzing sound and the smell of burnt plastic. A shower of blue sparks erupted from the wall. The overhead lights in that section of the hallway flickered and died, plunging the corridor into semi-darkness. Perfect. She hurried to the service phone near the elevator and dialed the maintenance extension. "Hello? This is Betty, on the 25th floor," she said, her voice pitched with mild panic. "I'm so sorry. I had an accident. I spilled my bucket, and it shorted something out near Mr. Chase's office. There were sparks." "Sparks? Damn it." Hector's tired voice crackled over the line. "Okay, stay away from it. I'm on my way." She hung up and waited, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Minutes later, she heard the service elevator ding. Hector appeared, pushing a cart loaded with tools. He grunted at her, his eyes already on the blackened outlet. "All right, "Let me see," he muttered, kneeling down. He pulled out a multimeter and started probing the socket. As he worked, he needed better access. The large, heavy door to David's office swung inward, and if it was closed, it blocked half the alcove. "Can you prop this door open?" he asked, not looking at her. "It's in my light." Her pulse leaped. This was the moment. She scurried over. The door was, of course, locked. Hector sighed, pulling a massive ring of master keys from his belt. He found the right one, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. "Just hold it," he said, turning back to the fried outlet. He hadn't relocked it. The latch was open. He was distracted, focused on the wiring, muttering to himself about cheap contractors and fire codes. This was her chance. She knew he would have to go down to the basement to cut the power at the circuit breaker. "You know," she said, her voice trembling slightly, playing the part of a flustered old woman. "I think I saw more smoke coming from the breaker closet down the hall. Maybe you should check that first?" Hector grunted, annoyed. "Probably just tripped the breaker. Stay here. Don't touch anything." He got up, leaving his toolbox on the floor, and trudged down the corridor toward the electrical closet. The moment he rounded the corner, she acted. She didn't have minutes. She had seconds. 90 at most. She pushed the heavy office door open wider and slipped inside. The air was cool, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and paper. She ignored the massive desk, the glowing screens of the computer. Her instincts, the instincts of a mother, a wife, who had spent a lifetime reading the hidden meanings in a room, pulled her elsewhere. Her eyes scanned the space and landed on a bookshelf. It wasn't filled with business texts. It was lined with family photos in sleek silver frames. There was Amelia, draped in jewels. There was Chloe, looking sullen and rebellious in a graduation photo. There were pictures of David with politicians, with celebrities, and then, at the very end of the shelf, was a leather-bound photo album. Her hands went to it immediately. It felt familiar. She opened it. The first page was a picture of a 6-year-old David grinning a gap-toothed smile, holding up a finger painting. And behind the photograph, tucked into the plastic sleeve, she felt a lump. It wasn't a document. It was something hard. Her fingers, nimble from years of sewing, carefully worked the photograph out of its sleeve. And there it was. A single, odd-looking key. It was heavy, brass, with an ornate, almost Gothic head. It wasn't a house key or a car key. It wasn't a safe deposit key. She knew what those looked like from the box she'd shared with Robert. Attached to it was a small brass tag, engraved with a number, 2117, and 2 words. The Olympian Club. The Olympian Club. The name hit her like a physical blow. It was an exclusive, old-money athletic club, a place where judges and CEOs and city council members made deals in steam rooms and on squash courts. Robert had always wanted to be a member, but had been blackballed for being too new money, too crass. David had gotten in, of course he had. This wasn't just about a slush fund. Embezzlement was messy, common. This key felt different. It was a key to a secret he kept not in a bank, but in a private locker in the heart of the city's power structure. The embezzlement, she realized with a sickening lurch, wasn't the crime. It was just the funding for something else. Something much, much darker. She heard Hector's footsteps returning down the hall. She snapped the album shut, slid it back into its place on the shelf, and slipped the key into the pocket of her uniform. She was out of the office and holding the door open, her expression one of vacant concern, a full 5 seconds before he reappeared. "Breaker's fried. I gotta shut the whole grid for this floor down," he grumbled, picking up his tools. "You can go. Nothing to clean here tonight." He locked David's office door without a second glance. As she walked toward the elevator, the heavy brass key felt like a stone in her pocket, a stone pulled from the depths of a very dark and very cold lake. 2 days later, her doorbell rang. It was a harsh, insistent buzz that rattled the thin door of her tiny apartment. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her world had shrunk to this room and the silent halls of Viridian Dynamics. She peered through the peephole, and her blood ran cold. It was Chloe, her granddaughter, standing there on the dingy landing, arms crossed, a backpack slung over one shoulder, looking thoroughly unimpressed by the surroundings. She had a laptop tucked under her other arm. How had she found her? Elizabeth opened the door. Chloe's eyes, a startlingly intelligent blue so much like her own, swept over the room, taking in the mattress on the floor, the single pot on the hot plate, the sparse, monastic existence. Her expression was a mixture of disbelief and a cynicism that was far too deep for a 20-year-old. "So, this is staying with an old friend from college?" Chloe asked, her voice dry. "Did she fall on hard times, or did you just join a cult?" "Chloe, how did you find me?" Chloe gave a small, humorless smile. "Grandma, please. You paid for the first month's rent with your debit card. You used your real name on the lease. You bought a burner phone, yes, but you called me from it once to check in. I'm a computer science major, not an idiot. It took me less than an hour to ping the phone's location and cross-reference rental agreements in a 5-block radius. You're not exactly a ghost." She walked past Elizabeth into the room, setting her laptop on the small, wobbly table. "The real question isn't how I found you. It's why you're here, in this hovel. Mom and Dad think you've had some kind of breakdown. They're talking to lawyers about your cognitive decline, about protecting your assets. You know what that means." Elizabeth closed the door, her mind racing. This was a complication she hadn't foreseen, a dangerous one. But as she looked at Chloe, at the sharp, questioning intelligence in her eyes, she saw something else, an opportunity, a potential ally, an unwilling one perhaps, but an ally nonetheless. Chloe had her father's intelligence, but none of his moral rot, and she had a deep, simmering resentment for her mother, Amelia, for her phoniness, her obsession with appearances. Elizabeth had seen it for years. She had to take a risk, a calculated one. "I haven't had a breakdown, Chloe," Elizabeth said, her voice low and steady. She sat on the edge of the mattress, gesturing for Chloe to take the room's only chair. "I'm here because I'm investigating your father." Chloe's eyebrows shot up. "Investigating? For what? Skimming on his taxes? Mom's Botox isn't cheap." The joke was brittle, sharp. Elizabeth decided to tell her a part of the truth, the simplest part, the part that was easiest to believe. "It's more than that. I believe he's stealing from his company. A lot of money. I needed to get close, to find proof without him knowing." Chloe stared at her, her cynical mask cracking for just a second, revealing a flicker of genuine shock. And then, intrigue. A puzzle. A problem to be solved. "You think Dad's an embezzler?" "I know he is," Elizabeth said, her voice firm. She told her about the anonymous posts on the company network, about Sarah Jenkins, about a slush fund. She edited the story carefully, leaving out her infiltration as a cleaner. She framed it as online research, as a lucky break. She needed Chloe's skills, not her judgment. Chloe was silent for a long time, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the cover of her laptop. She looked around the bare room again, as if seeing it in a new light. It wasn't the room of a grieving, confused old woman. It was a safe house, a base of operations. "Okay," Chloe said finally, her voice hushed. "Okay. I hate my mother's fake country club friends and my father's sociopathic ambition. I always knew something was slimy, but I figured it was just standard issue corporate greed. This is different." She opened her laptop. The screen illuminated her face, making her look serious, determined. "What do you need?" The question was a lifeline. Elizabeth felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her. She wasn't alone anymore. "I have 2 things," Elizabeth said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the heavy brass key, placing it on the table between them. "I found this. It's for a locker. Number 217 at the Olympian Club." Chloe's eyes widened. "The Olympian? That's not a gym, Grandma. That's a fortress. The membership list is basically the city's shadow government." "I know," Elizabeth said. "I need you to find out everything you can about it. The security, the layout, the members, anything." "And the second thing?" Chloe asked, already typing furiously, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "A name," Elizabeth said, the word feeling like ash in her mouth. "Sarah Jenkins. She used to work for your father. He destroyed her career. I need to find her. I need a digital trace, an address, anything. If she's out there, she's the proof." Chloe looked up from her screen, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. It was a smile Elizabeth recognized. It was David's smile, but this time, it was on her side. An exclusive club and a ghost, Chloe said. Okay, Grandma, let's go hunting. Chloe's voice on the other end of the line was a masterpiece of controlled panic. It was a performance worthy of a stage, a delicate blend of youthful entitlement and feigned distress. She was speaking to the membership coordinator at the Olympian Club, a place so steeped in old money and exclusivity that its very name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones. "Oh my God, I am so sorry to do this," Chloe said, her voice cracking just so. "My father, David Davenport, he asked me to meet his guest here for a squash game, but my grandfather just had a fall. Yes, he's okay, thank you, but I have to get to the hospital. The thing is, his guest is already on her way. An old family friend." "You Betty Novak?" "Yes. He said he left a guest pass for her at the front desk. Is there any way you can just let her in? I feel absolutely terrible leaving her stranded." There was a pause. Elizabeth, listening on speakerphone from Chloe's small apartment, held her breath. The lie was a house of cards, beautiful and fragile. "I see." The coordinator's voice was crisp, efficient. "Mr. Davenport is a valued member. Of course, we will see to it that Ms. Novak is taken care of. Please, give your grandfather our best." "You are a lifesaver," Chloe breathed, and hung up. She looked at Elizabeth, her eyes wide. "The pass is there. All you have to do is walk in and ask for it, Betty." Elizabeth nodded, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Betty Novak, her maiden name, a ghost she hadn't inhabited for over 50 years. Today, that ghost would walk through the gilded doors of her son's private world. An hour later, she stood before the club's imposing oak entrance. The building didn't welcome you. It appraised you. It was a fortress of mahogany and quiet power. Taking a deep breath, Elizabeth pushed the heavy door open. The air inside was cool and smelled of lemon polish and old leather. Men in expensive suits moved through the lobby with an easy, inherited confidence she had never possessed. She felt like a trespasser, an anomaly in this ecosystem of wealth. She walked to the polished front desk, her sensible shoes silent on the Persian rug. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm Betty Novak. I believe David Davenport left a guest pass for me." The young man at the desk smiled, a flash of perfect teeth. He didn't even check an ID. In this world, if you looked like you belonged, you did. And if you had a name like David Davenport vouching for you, the doors simply opened. "Of course, Ms. Novak. Welcome to the Olympian Club. The ladies' locker room is down the hall to your left." He handed her a plastic card with the word guest printed on it. It felt heavy in her hand, like a key to a forbidden kingdom. She followed his directions, her mind racing. Chloe's research had been meticulous. The guest pass gave her access to all facilities for the day, including the locker rooms. David, according to his social media, played squash here every Tuesday and Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. He rented a permanent locker, number 217. And Chloe, through a bit of digital sleight of hand that Elizabeth didn't fully understand involving the club's new member portal, had managed to get the combination. The ladies' locker room was a sanctuary of hushed calm. The scent of chlorine from the nearby pool mingled with expensive soap. It was all marble and dark wood, with plush benches and towels folded with geometric precision. It was empty. She moved down the row of lockers, her fingers tracing the engraved brass numbers. 215, 216, 217. It looked just like all the others. Anonymous. Innocuous. Her hand trembled as she spun the dial. Right, left, right. The combination Chloe had given her. She pulled the handle. There was a soft metallic click. The sound echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. She hesitated. This was the precipice. The moment before everything changed. For weeks, she had been operating on a theory, on whispers from disgruntled ex-employees and the cold math of David's finances. She expected to find stacks of cash, undocumented income, the vulgar, simple proof of embezzlement. Something she could understand, something she could fight. She pulled the door open. There was no cash. Her breath caught in her throat. The locker was neat, almost sparse. A pair of squash shoes, a can of tennis balls, a towel, and on the small shelf above, a series of slim, leather-bound folders. 5 of them. They weren't manila folders from an office supply store. They were rich, dark green leather, like something a lawyer would carry into a courtroom. Each one was meticulously labeled with a small, embossed brass plate. She reached for the first one. The leather was cool and smooth beneath her fingers. The name on the plate read, Judge Alistair Finch. Her hands shaking, she opened it. It wasn't a financial ledger. Inside, nestled in protective plastic sleeves, were photographs. A man she recognized from the newspapers, Judge Finch, a man known for his harsh sentences and family values platform, was in a hotel room with a young woman who was clearly not his wife. Behind the photos was a single sheet of paper, a bank statement showing a large, unexplained deposit into an offshore account. A wave of nausea washed over her. She pushed the folder back and grabbed the next one. Councilwoman Isabella Reyes. Inside were not photos, but documents. Copies of construction permits for a downtown development project, fast-tracked and approved. Tucked behind them, the deed to a vacation home in the Cayman Islands, owned by a shell corporation, a corporation she recognized from her late-night research into Viridian Dynamics subsidiaries. The third folder, the fourth. Each one a story of a secret life, a hidden sin, a corporate rival's hidden gambling debts, a city official's secret drug habit. It wasn't just embezzlement. This was something far darker, far more insidious. David wasn't just stealing money. He was collecting lives. He was wielding power not through innovation or charisma, but through the shame and weakness of others. He had built an arsenal of ruin. Her blood ran cold. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it all was staggering. This was the real source of his success. The Viridian miracle wasn't built on code. It was built on blackmail. Then she saw the final folder. It was tucked at the very back, almost hidden from view. The leather was older, more worn than the others. The brass plate on it was slightly tarnished, but the name was perfectly clear. A name she had not spoken, not even allowed herself to think in 50 years. A name that belonged to a ghost that haunted the deepest corners of her memory. Liam O'Connell. The name hit her with the force of a physical blow. The locker room seemed to tilt, the polished wood and marble blurring at the edges. Her knees felt weak. She gripped the edge of the locker door to steady herself, her knuckles white. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Liam was gone. He was buried. He was a secret she and her husband Robert had taken to the grave, or so she had thought. With a trembling, almost reverent hand, she reached for the folder. It felt heavier than all the others combined. She didn't need to open it. She already knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, what she would find inside. She knew because she had lived it. The folder in her hands wasn't just a collection of secrets. It was a tombstone, and her son had been the one to engrave it. The world of the Olympian Club dissolved, replaced by the faded colors of the 1970s. She was young again, trapped in the gilded cage of her marriage to Robert Davenport. He wasn't physically abusive, not in a way that left marks. His cruelty was a quieter, more suffocating thing. It was in the way he dismissed her opinions, controlled her finances, isolated her from her friends. He had polished her into the perfect corporate wife, a beautiful, silent accessory for his ambition. She was dying a slow, quiet death in their perfect Lincoln Park home. And then there was Liam. Liam O'Connell was a journalist for a small, independent Chicago paper. He was everything Robert was not. He was passionate, chaotic, fiercely intelligent, and he saw her. He didn't see Mrs. Robert Davenport. He saw Elizabeth. He listened to her ideas about art and politics. He argued with her, laughed with her, made her feel alive for the first time in a decade. Their affair was inevitable, a desperate gasp for air in a suffocating life. It was stolen afternoons in his messy apartment that smelled of old books and coffee, whispers in crowded bars, the thrill of a secret that was hers and hers alone. For 6 months, she lived a double life, torn between the suffocating safety of her marriage and the dangerous, beautiful freedom Liam represented. She knew it couldn't last. She just never imagined how it would end. The memory came back with brutal clarity. The night Robert found out, he didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He simply stood in the doorway of their bedroom, a single photograph in his hand, a blurry picture of her and Liam leaving a small cinema. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying calm. "I am disappointed, Elizabeth," he'd said, his voice like ice. "Not in your infidelity, that's a common, boring failure. I'm disappointed in your sloppiness." The next day, the true horror began. Robert didn't just want to end the affair. He wanted to erase Liam. He wanted to punish her by dismantling the one thing that had brought her joy. And he decided he would not do it alone. He called their son, David, into his study. David was 17 then, a quiet, intense boy on the cusp of manhood, desperate for his father's approval. Elizabeth had watched from the hallway, hidden in the shadows, her heart pounding. "Sit down, David," Robert had said, his voice calm and instructive, like a professor beginning a lecture. "Your mother has made a poor association with a man named Liam O'Connell. This man is a threat to our family, to our stability, to everything I have built for you." "What did he do?" David had asked, his voice small. "He represents chaos," Robert said, ignoring the question. "And we do not allow chaos in this house. You are going to help me restore order. This will be a lesson for you, a lesson in how the world truly works. It's not about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about knowing where the levers are. It's about control." And so he began to teach his son the art of destruction. It started small. He had David follow Liam. "I want to know his routines," Robert had instructed. "Where he eats, who he talks to. Find his vulnerabilities." David, her son, became a spy. He would come home and report to his father in the study, his face a mixture of fear and a strange, budding excitement. Elizabeth would listen from the top of the stairs, sick with guilt and powerlessness. A week later, the first blow fell. A story appeared in a rival newspaper accusing Liam of fabricating sources for a major investigation he was working on. The story was full of convincing, specific details, details only David could have gathered. Liam was suspended from his job. Next, Robert targeted his finances. Using his connections, he had Liam's credit lines frozen, citing a manufactured risk profile. A tip was called in to his landlord about a disturbance, and Liam, unable to fight it, was evicted. David's role escalated. He was no longer just an observer. He was a participant. Elizabeth remembered seeing him on the phone, his voice low, impersonating a bank official to one of Liam's freelance clients, questioning the legitimacy of his invoices. She saw the satisfaction in Robert's eyes as he watched his son learn the lessons of cruelty. David was his father's apprentice, being molded into a weapon. The final act was the most vicious. Robert discovered Liam had an estranged brother who was battling addiction. He used David to feed the brother lies, that Liam was stealing from him, that he was trying to have him committed. It was the final, devastating betrayal. Liam O'Connell, the crusading journalist, the man who had shown her a brief, beautiful glimpse of life, was broken. He lost his job, his apartment, his reputation, and finally, his family. 2 months after Robert first showed her the photograph, a small article appeared on the back page of the paper. A single paragraph noting that a man named Liam O'Connell had taken his own life in a cheap motel room on the edge of the city. Robert had folded the newspaper neatly and placed it on the dining room table. He looked at Elizabeth, his eyes devoid of any emotion. "Order is restored," he said. Then he looked at David, who stood silently beside him. "You did well, son. You're learning." David didn't look proud. He just looked empty. And in that moment, Elizabeth realized she hadn't just lost her lover. She had lost her son. He had been hollowed out and rebuilt in his father's monstrous image, standing in the locker room of the Olympian Club 50 years later, the worn leather folder in her hands. Elizabeth finally understood. The embezzlement, the Instagram posts, the luxury cars, it was all a sideshow, a distraction. The money wasn't the point. It never was. The money was just the fuel for the machine of control, of intimidation, of destruction that her husband had built and her son had inherited. David wasn't just continuing his father's business. He was continuing his father's legacy, a legacy of calculated, soul-crushing cruelty. She closed the folder and placed it carefully back on the shelf. She shut the locker door, the click echoing the finality she felt in her soul. She walked out of the Olympian Club, no longer Betty Novak, the timid guest, but Elizabeth Davenport, a woman who had finally seen the full, unvarnished face of the enemy. And the enemy had her son's eyes. The call was made an hour later from the quiet of her own small apartment. She didn't use her burner phone. She used her regular cell, the one they all knew. She wanted them to hear her real voice. "David," she said when he answered, his tone brisk and impatient. "I need you, Amelia, and Chloe to come to the house. The old house, this evening." "Mother, I'm in the middle of something. Can't this wait? We can have the realtor call you." "No," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a new weight to it, a core of steel he had never heard before. "This cannot wait. We are going to have a final discussion about the sale of the house. 8 o'clock. Don't be late." She hung up before he could argue. They arrived at 8 on the dot, a united front of condescension. David, handsome and sharp in a tailored suit, the very picture of success. Amelia at his side, exuding a brittle, expensive glamour, her eyes already scanning the old familiar rooms with a dismissive air, calculating how much the fixtures would fetch. Chloe trailed behind them, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously toward Elizabeth. They walked into the dining room. Elizabeth was waiting for them. She wasn't standing meekly by the door. She was seated at the head of the long mahogany table, the same table where Robert had once presided over their lives like a king. The table was clear except for a single neat stack of papers in front of her. She was wearing a simple black dress. She looked, David thought with a flicker of annoyance, entirely too composed. The frail, confused woman he was preparing to have gently moved into a managed care facility was nowhere to be seen. In her place sat a stranger. "Thank you for coming," Elizabeth said, her voice cool and even. "Please, sit down." Amelia sighed dramatically. "Elizabeth, really, if this is another emotional plea about the house—" "It's not," Elizabeth interrupted, her gaze fixed on her son. "This is about business. Your business, David." David gave a small, indulgent laugh. He sat down opposite her, leaning back in his chair with an air of theatrical patience. "All right, Mother. I have a board meeting in Tokyo over Zoom in an hour. What is this about?" Elizabeth didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, feeling the power dynamic in the room shift for the first time in her life. She was no longer the subject, the problem to be managed. She was the one in control. "Chloe and I," she began, nodding briefly to her granddaughter, "have been reviewing some of Viridian Dynamics' financial activities. It's quite fascinating. All these shell corporations, these consulting fees paid to companies that don't seem to exist, these creative expense reports." She slid the top document from the pile across the table. It was a flowchart Chloe had meticulously prepared, linking Viridian funds to offshore accounts, which in turn linked to purchases: a yacht, a villa, Amelia's jewelry. Amelia's face went white. She snatched the paper, her eyes scanning it wildly. "What is this? This is insane. David?" David didn't even look at the paper. He kept his eyes on Elizabeth, a smug, pitying smile playing on his lips. "Mother," he said, his voice soft, patronizing, "I know this is difficult. The grief, the change, it can cause confusion, paranoia even. You've been spending too much time alone, reading conspiracy theories on the internet." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This is exactly what I was worried about. It's why Amelia and I believe Evergreen Meadows is the best place for you. They have doctors there, wonderful people who can help you with these fantasies." He smiled, confident he had just played the winning card. The threat of legal guardianship, of declaring her mentally incompetent. It had worked on countless business rivals. It would certainly work on his own frail mother. "You think I'm delusional?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I think you're unwell," he corrected gently. "And you're upset. You're lashing out. And that's okay. We understand. But you cannot make these wild, baseless accusations. It's libelous. It's damaging." He laughed again, a short, sharp bark. "Do you have any idea what my lawyers would do with this? They'd tear you apart, Mother. Let's not let it come to that. Just sign the papers. Let us take care of you." Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her chair, looking from her father's arrogant face to her grandmother's unnerving calm. She had helped Elizabeth build the case, but she hadn't been prepared for the sheer coldness of her father's dismissal. He wasn't just denying it, he was trying to erase her grandmother's reality. Elizabeth held his gaze. The smug CEO, the powerful man, the son who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle. She saw none of that. She only saw the 17-year-old boy standing in his father's study, his soul being carved away piece by piece. With a chilling, deliberate calm, she reached for something under the table. She brought up the old, worn, leather-bound folder and slid it across the polished surface of the dining room table. It stopped directly in front of David. The tarnished brass plate caught the light. Liam O'Connell. "Before you call your doctors," Elizabeth said, her voice a whisper that cut through the room like a razor, "let's talk about what your father taught you." The name landed in the room with a dead thud. The smugness vanished from David's face. It was as if a mask had been ripped away, revealing something raw and panicked underneath. His eyes were wide, fixed on the folder. He didn't touch it. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. Amelia looked from David's stricken face to the folder, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Who is Liam O'Connell?" "He was a man your father-in-law destroyed," Elizabeth said, her eyes never leaving David's. "A long time ago." And then she told them. She told them everything. Her voice was steady, devoid of self-pity. She recounted the affair not as a romance, but as a fact. She described Robert's cold, calculated reaction. And then she detailed the systematic destruction of Liam's life. She spoke of the lies, the planted stories, the financial ruin, and with every detail she implicated the boy who had become the man sitting before her. "Your father taught you how to gather information," she said, her voice low and even. "How to find a person's weakness, how to intimidate, how to isolate, how to dismantle a man piece by piece until there was nothing left. You weren't just his son. You were his project." David's composure had shattered. His face was pale, slick with a thin sheen of sweat. He looked smaller in his expensive suit, shrunken. "Stop," he whispered, the single word hoarse. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but I do," Elizabeth said. "I finally understand. The money you stole wasn't for Amelia's diamonds or your fancy club. That was just a perk. The money was to fund the machine. The same machine Robert built all those years ago. The one you used to collect secrets, to blackmail judges and councilwomen. The one you used to continue his work." She leaned in, her eyes burning into his. "You didn't just inherit his company, David. You inherited his sickness." Then she delivered the final blow. She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out the cheap burner phone. It looked absurdly out of place on the polished mahogany. She pressed a button. A voice filled the silent room. David's voice. But it was a voice Chloe had never heard before. It was flat, clinical, and utterly devoid of emotion. The recording was crackly, captured one night while Elizabeth hid in a dusty supply closet at Viridian headquarters, her heart in her throat. "The target is Mark Stenson from Etheria Tech," David's recorded voice said, the words chillingly clear. "He's got a gambling problem, a big one, hidden debts to some very unsavory people. We have the ledgers, we have the photos of the meet. We don't threaten, we don't demand, we just make him understand his position. We have to dismantle him piece by piece, make him see that the only rational choice is to sell his patent to us for a fraction of its worth. It's cleaner that way, no witnesses. Just a man making a logical business decision under pressure. Dismantle him, piece by piece. The exact chilling phrase Robert had used 50 years ago. A direct echo of the ghost in the room. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than any sound. Chloe stared at her father. Her expression, which had been a mixture of confusion and anxiety, was crumbling. The man she knew, the charming, successful, powerful father who took her to galas and paid her tuition, was gone. In his place was the stranger on that recording, a cold, predatory monster. Her face contorted, a silent canvas of dawning horror and revulsion. Her entire life, her privilege, her identity, it was all funded by this evil. David didn't rage. He didn't protest. He didn't even look at his mother. He looked at Chloe. He saw the judgment in his daughter's eyes, the final, irrefutable condemnation, and in that moment, he simply deflated. The charisma, the power, the arrogance, it all evaporated, leaving a hollow, defeated man. He slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, the evil in him finally, irrevocably exposed to his own child. Amelia stared at her husband, then at Elizabeth, then at the folder on the table. The foundation of her perfect life had just turned to dust beneath her feet. The family wasn't just broken, it was shattered. And in the center of the wreckage, Elizabeth sat, calm and righteous, the quiet architect of its demolition. The silence in the room was a physical thing. It pressed down, heavier than the oak furniture, thicker than the dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light. The tiny click of the digital recorder stopping echoed like a gunshot. David's face, once a mask of arrogant charisma, had collapsed. It was a ruin, all hollows and disbelief. Amelia's perfectly manicured hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. She stared at the small black device on the coffee table as if it were a venomous snake. Chloe, standing by the window, looked only at her grandmother. She saw not the frail, elderly woman she had always known, but a figure carved from granite, ancient and unmovable. David finally broke the stillness. A sound escaped his throat, a choked, guttural noise that was half sob, half laugh. "Mother, what is this? A joke? Some sick, twisted joke?" His voice was thin, reedy. The CEO baritone had vanished. Elizabeth didn't even look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the polished surface of the table, where the key to the house sat next to the recorder. "A joke," she repeated, her voice soft, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "No, David, the joke is over. The joke was me, the quiet, obedient wife, the doting, blind mother. The joke was that you and your father before you thought I was stupid, that I was furniture. Something to be moved from room to room, house to house, life to life, without a thought." Amelia finally found her voice, sharp and panicked. "What are you going to do with that? The police? You can't be serious, Elizabeth. You would destroy your own family? For what? This house? David was trying to help you." Elizabeth's head turned slowly, and her gaze fell upon Amelia. For the first time, Amelia saw no warmth, no history, no familial connection in those eyes. She saw only a judge looking at a defendant. "Help me?" Elizabeth's voice was laced with a coldness that made the air feel thin. "You call threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent help? You call trying to steal the last thing I own in this world help? You came into this family with nothing, Amelia. You attached yourself to my son's ambition like a remora on a shark. You enjoyed the blood in the water just as much as he did. Don't you dare speak to me of family." Amelia flinched as if struck. She looked at David, her eyes pleading. "David, do something. Say something. She's lost her mind. It's grief. We can get her a doctor." "A doctor," David mumbled, seizing the word like a lifeline. "Yes, that's it. Mother, you're not well. The stress. Losing Dad. It's understandable. We can fix this. We can get you the best care. We'll tear this up." He gestured vaguely at the recorder. "And we'll forget this ever happened. We'll go back to the plan. Evergreen Meadows is beautiful. You'll love it." He was trying to piece his mask back together, but the cracks were too deep. The confident smile was a desperate grimace. Elizabeth let out a short, sharp breath that was almost a laugh, but it held no humor. "The police." "Oh, David, you still don't understand, do you? You still think in such small, predictable terms. An arrest, a trial, lawyers, headlines, then a quiet sentence served in a comfortable, low-security facility. Your father taught you better than that. He taught you that true destruction isn't a quick blade to the heart. It's a slow, meticulous poison. It's the death of 1,000 cuts. The kind that leaves the victim walking and breathing, but hollowed out inside. The kind that makes them question their own sanity, their own worth. The kind that Liam O'Connell suffered. The kind you were preparing for Sarah Jenkins. The kind you both reserved for me. She finally stood up. Her movements were slow, deliberate, but infused with a strength that seemed to radiate from her very bones. She walked over to the mahogany sideboard, the one Robert had bought at an auction 50 years ago, a monument to his own perceived importance. She pulled open a drawer. Inside, nestled amongst old linen napkins, were 3 thick, pristine manila envelopes. She carried them back to the table and laid them down, side by side. A trinity of ruin. "Going to the police would have been a mercy, David," she said, her voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, the kind of tone one might use to discuss the weather. It was terrifying. And after 50 years in this house, I find I am fresh out of mercy. I decided to give you the same courtesy you and your father gave to your enemies. I decided to burn everything, not just you, the entire rotten kingdom you built on his foundations. She tapped the first envelope. This one. This is for the city officials, your friends, the zoning commissioner who approved your last monstrosity downtown, the judge who made your competitor's lawsuit disappear, the councilwoman who's been feeding you insider information for a decade. I believe you called them your portfolio of influence. A charming term. Inside this envelope are copies of everything from your father's files in that athletic club locker. The photographs, the audio files, the carefully documented ledgers of their indiscretions. All of it. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. David's face was ashen. Amelia's mouth was slightly agape, her breath coming in shallow little pants. "I was trying to decide who to give it to," Elizabeth continued thoughtfully. "The DA's office, the FBI, too bureaucratic, too slow. They might get buried in paperwork. So I sent it by special courier this morning to the Sentinel. You know them. The online news journal with the investigative team you called a pack of sanctimonious vultures. The one whose lead reporter you tried to have fired last year by calling her publisher. I have a feeling she's going to be particularly motivated to dig into this. I imagine the first story will break online. Oh, probably tomorrow morning, just in time for the markets to open." Chloe took a sharp, involuntary breath. She understood now. This wasn't just revenge. This was a tactical demolition. Elizabeth moved her hand to the second envelope. "This one," she said, her voice unwavering, "is about the money. Viridian Dynamics, your brilliant, shining monument to 21st century innovation, and to your father's old-school talent for cooking the books. I found the slush fund, David, the one Sarah Jenkins asked about. It wasn't hard, once I knew what to look for. It's amazing what you can find on a shared server when you know the right janitor's closet to access it from. All the offshore accounts, the dummy corporations, the inflated invoices, the ghost employees. I even found the wire transfers to Amelia's interior design consultant in the Cayman Islands. Very clever." Amelia made a small, wounded sound. "I compiled it all," Elizabeth said, her gaze sweeping over them both. "Charts, timelines, bank statements. It's a remarkably complete picture of systemic, decade-long fraud. And I sent it to the one group of people who love paperwork more than anyone on Earth, the Internal Revenue Service. Their Criminal Investigation Division, to be precise. I included a little anonymous cover letter, suggesting they might want to look into tax evasion, money laundering, and a few other things. I suspect your assets will be frozen by the end of the week. All of them." David swayed on his feet. He reached out and braced himself on the back of a chair. The blood had drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy gray pallor. "No," he whispered. "No, you didn't." "Oh, yes, I did," Elizabeth said, her voice hardening just a fraction. "And finally," she placed her hand on the third and final envelope. Her expression softened, but it was a sad, weary softening. "This one is for the people. The ones you and your father didn't blackmail or bribe, but simply broke. The employees you fired for speaking up. The small business owners you bankrupted. The partners you betrayed. I have Sarah Jenkins's story. I have a dozen others, pulled from those old employee forums you thought were defunct. I have emails, performance reviews used as weapons, non-disclosure agreements designed to intimidate. And I have my own sworn affidavit as an employee, detailing the culture of fear and paranoia you cultivated so carefully. She looked directly at Chloe now. I sent this to a law firm in New York, a firm that specializes in class action lawsuits against corporations with toxic work environments. They don't just want money, David. They want to make an example of you. They want to put your face on every business ethics cautionary tale for the next 50 years. Silence descended again, absolute and final. There was nothing left to say. David stared at the 3 envelopes, 3 tombstones marking the death of his life. Amelia was weeping silently, her mascara running in black rivulets down her powdered cheeks. All the years of social climbing, of careful curation of her life on Instagram, of feeling superior to everyone, it had all evaporated in the space of 10 minutes. "It's all gone," David said, his voice a hollow echo in the cavernous room. "Everything. You destroyed your own son." Elizabeth picked up the single, old-fashioned brass key from the table. She held it between her thumb and forefinger, its metal cool against her skin. "You were destroyed a long time ago, David. You were destroyed the day you decided your father's cruelty was a legacy to be honored, not a sickness to be cured. You stopped being my son when you threatened to put me in a cage so you could pick my bones clean." She looked around the room, at the heavy curtains, the dark wood, the portraits of stern-faced ancestors. "For 50 years this house was my cage. Robert built it, and you were more than happy to lock the door. I polished its floors, I dusted its memories, I suffocated in its silence." She walked to the large oak table in the center of the room and placed the key down gently. It made a small, definitive clink. "Now it's yours," she said softly. "You can have it. You and Amelia can stay here and watch the empire you loved more than anything, more than your own child, burn to the ground on television." She turned and walked toward the front door without a backward glance. Chloe, after a moment's hesitation, moved to follow her. "Mother, wait!" David cried out, a raw, desperate sound. "Where are you going?" Elizabeth paused with her hand on the doorknob. She didn't turn around. "I'm going to go be Elizabeth," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Just Elizabeth." She opened the door and walked out into the late afternoon sun, Chloe right behind her. She did not look back. She left David and Amelia standing in the silent, opulent tomb they had inherited, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall counting down the final seconds of their world. The sharp, salty wind was the first thing she noticed. It was a constant presence, a wild, cleansing force that smelled of kelp and distance. It whipped her hair around her face and tasted of freedom. The sound was the next. Not the muffled drone of city traffic, the distant wail of a siren, or the oppressive, weighted silence of the Lincoln Park house. Here, there was only the rhythmic crash and sigh of the Pacific Ocean, a sound so vast and ancient it made all human concerns feel small and temporary. The cottage was small, its cedar shingles weathered to a soft silver gray by the relentless coastal air. It stood on a bluff overlooking a stretch of windswept Oregon beach, a world away from the manicured lawns and iron gates of her former life. Inside, there was no mahogany, no heavy velvet, no portraits of disapproving ancestors. There were only comfortable, slightly worn armchairs, shelves filled with secondhand books, and large windows that framed the endless churning expanse of the sea. The storm had broken, just as she'd planned. For the first few weeks, it had been a media deluge. Chloe had shielded her from the worst of it, but fragments still broke through. A headline on a newspaper glimpsed in the local grocery store: Veridian CEO David Miller indicted on federal fraud charges. A snippet from a news report playing on the television in the corner of a diner. The scandal widens, implicating several key figures in City Hall. A notification on Chloe's phone, quickly swiped away with a photo of Amelia, face tight and pale, swarmed by reporters outside a courthouse. The stories painted a picture of total, systemic collapse. The Sentinel's exposé had triggered a full-blown political crisis in Chicago. The IRS had frozen every known asset belonging to David and Amelia, leaving them in a legal and financial limbo from which they would likely never escape. The class action lawsuit had attracted hundreds of former employees, a chorus of voices rising up to condemn the toxic empire the Millers had built. The house of cards had fallen, not in a neat pile, but scattered to the four winds. Elizabeth felt nothing watching it unfold. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not even the bitter taste of revenge. She felt only a profound, hollowed-out emptiness, the quiet that comes after a long and brutal war. She had won. She had raised the battlefield. Now, she had to learn to live in the peace. She sat on the small wooden porch, a thick wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, a mug of steaming tea warming her hands. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the undersides of the clouds in shades of apricot and rose. Chloe sat beside her, a laptop open but ignored on the small table between them. She had transferred to a small liberal arts college nearby, her computer science skills now being applied to marine biology datasets instead of corporate firewalls. The silence between them was easy, comfortable, woven from a new, unspoken understanding. "More tea, Grandma?" Chloe asked, her voice soft, carried away almost instantly by the wind. Elizabeth shook her head, a small smile touching her lips. "No, dear, I'm fine." They watched as a flock of sandpipers skittered along the edge of the surf, a frantic, synchronized dance against the incoming tide. "I saw an article today," Chloe said quietly, her eyes still on the birds. She didn't need to elaborate. There was only one article she could mean. They rejected his bail. "He's a flight risk," they said. Elizabeth took a slow sip of her tea. The warmth spread through her chest. "Is he?" "I don't know," Chloe admitted. "I don't know who he is anymore, or who he ever was." She finally turned to look at her grandmother, her young face etched with a sorrow that was older than her years. "Was he always like that? Like Grandpa Robert?" Elizabeth stared out at the horizon, where the sea met the sky in a blurry gray line. She thought for a long moment, not reliving the pain, but observing it, as if from a great distance. "No, not always. There was a time when he was a little boy. He was kind. He loved stories. He was afraid of the dark." She sighed, a small, wispy sound. "But your grandfather's shadow was very long, Chloe, and very cold. Some people are strong enough to step out of a shadow like that. Others learn to love the cold. David learned to love the cold." "And Mom?" Chloe's voice was barely a whisper. "Your mother was drawn to the illusion of warmth," Elizabeth said. "The warmth of money, the warmth of status. She thought it would protect her. But it was just reflected light from a dying star. There was never any real heat there." Chloe was quiet for a long time, just watching her grandmother's profile against the fading light. "Are you okay?" she asked, the question she had asked 100 times in 100 different ways over the past months. "Really, truly okay?" Elizabeth turned her head, her eyes clear and deep, meeting Chloe's. "I feel unwritten," she said, the words coming slowly as she found them. "All my life, I was a character in someone else's story. I was Robert's wife. I was David's mother. Every thought, every action was a response to them. A reaction. I was a mirror, reflecting their needs, their anger, their ambition." She looked down at her own hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, resting on the wool blanket. They were just hands, her hands. When I walked out of that house, it was like the book slammed shut. All the pages went blank. And for the first time, there's no one standing over my shoulder telling me what to write. The mirror is shattered." She looked back up at the magnificent, indifferent ocean. "I lost a son. I lost the only life I ever knew. It's a devastating thing, Chloe. It leaves a hole you can't ever fill." A single tear traced a path down her weathered cheek, but she did not wipe it away. It wasn't a tear of sadness or of regret. It was a tear of release. But I found myself, or the possibility of myself, lying underneath all the rubble. For the first time in over 50 years, I'm not a wife. I'm not a mother. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes and made them shine in the twilight. I am just Elizabeth. And as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a soft purple glow, she knew it to be true. She was finally, devastatingly, free.